Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream. We have a live stream every Saturday at 2:08 Central Time. I almost did it at 2:07 today, but then I thought that's crazy. Let me go brush my hair. So I did. So today's topic is specifically going to be about the livestock because it seems like we just get caught up in the gear, and I want to get back to why we have the gear because that's way more important than what's going on with the equipment underneath. So we'll talk about the pros and cons. Hey, Rick, how are you? I see Pop Reef is here. Santana, you are third, not first. Hey, Thomas, good to see you. There's not a lot of big news to share. We're just, living our lives. It's hot in summer, but somehow my AC is keeping up, which is pretty awesome. Actually, all my air conditioners are keeping up perfectly now that they're working right. And the other day it was 110 outside and the house was 74, like it should be. And even the area where Minion is, where I cut my acrylic on the CNC, it's been battling, and the room has had a low of 80 degrees at night. And now it's holding at 77 all throughout the day because I made a couple more small changes in that room, and it made a difference. So I'm really glad about that. And then the outside studio, of course, has got perfect temperature all the time where I go work. That building is, it's been up for more than a year. And a year ago today, I was setting up the employee break area, which is just a cube with a coffee maker and some snacks. And, that was before I had everything in there. And I was just thinking, wow, I can't believe it's been less than a year of me working in there because it feels like I've been in there longer. But I really do appreciate that I can go out there to work and then I come inside the house and the house is a house. And when I look at my Facebook memories, I see all these pictures of like a room full of RODI parts and I'm building RO units. Or I have a sump on the table and I have more sumps in the back that are curing. Or I've got others. I had so much work in the living room for so long. And to put that work outside and separate work from home has really been good for me mentally. And I'm really glad that after so long that I was able to accomplish that goal. Because it was one of those things that I actually dreamt about it for years. And then, as you guys know the story, I spent a lot of money. I had someone pour a concrete slab, and then a metal building went up, and then I did all the inside, and then I hired a sheetrocker, and then I ended up moving everything inside there, and the whole shop is out there for me to box up the items because I sell things on my website to make a living. I guess I should segue into that. That's a good thing to share from time to time here. Where is that image? It could be anywhere. How about right there? So if you would like to buy things from milevsreef.com, I greatly appreciate it. This week was a good week. I was very happy to see orders rolling in. I realize this time of year, a lot of times people don't spend much on their aquariums because they're out enjoying, life. But when it's this hot, I think we're kind of hibernating a little bit from the heat. And so if you need test kits or if you need pumps or lighting, if you need acrylic things that I can build for you, I'm your man. And I appreciate the business you throw my way. While I'm throwing things on the screen, I'll go ahead and put up Club Milev's Reef. It is our group. We just had our 5-year anniversary earlier this month, and we have over 9,000 members in that group right now. And this group has been designed to let people interact and share their tanks with each other so I can see it. And when people ask on this live stream, hey, can you help me with such and such? Very often I say, can you please post it in Club Milev's Reef? So that is my area where you can find me and show things to me and ask questions. And it's really good because we have a great group of people. We have good moderators that make sure that the rules are enforced. And a lot of people say they've been watching this channel for years, but they just now joined the group. Well, you have been missing out for 5 years. You don't know what you're missing. And I do hope you like it when you finally do join. So it's facebook.com/groups/milevsreef. All right. I wanted to get into the topic of livestock because, we don't really dwell on that much on this channel. We may have a video about LPS care or about acropora care or deep sand beds or cyanobacteria. But there's not a lot of conversation about the fish and the corals that we buy and put in our aquariums. And I don't know why that is. So maybe I just had an epiphany this week, but I just thought we should take a few minutes, and this isn't going to be a long topic. We'll get into your questions, after we're done with this topic. But I wanted to get into the thought process of where we are as hobbyists when it comes to livestock. And I'm not talking about the price of livestock. I'm talking about you bought it. You have it. let's talk about how we're going to keep them healthy. We oftentimes find ourselves caught up in equipment that may or may not be working correctly, or parameters that may not be correct. But in the end, it always comes down to how is the livestock. So when you're looking in your aquarium, first thing you should be doing is cleaning the glass. Get a good look. Number 2, turn off the blues. Turn up the whites. Get a good look. Look at your fish. Look at your corals. Look at the rock work. Look at the sand. Look at everything, because we want to make sure that everything is in good, healthy condition and that things aren't going to get away from us. You know, if you have blue lighting, you may not notice the hair algae problem that's building up on the rock. You might just see some fuzz and you're thinking it's something black, or under white light, it's green algae. And you're like, oh, okay, I need more cleanup crew. So you add some. But is the sand clean, or is it got some kind of a film on the top? Does it have diatoms on top? Does it have cyano growing here and there and everywhere? These are things that you're going to see under white lighting better. But let's talk about the fish. Now, granted, I am not a fish disease person. I chant that to everyone that asks me for help with their fish. And I point everyone to Humblefish. He is the fish disease expert. He has an entire forum. He has a website. It's called humble.fish. You just hit enter. It's instead of humble.com, it's humble.fish. And you just go to that website and you post your questions, or you read through his articles, and you can get help to make your sick fish healthy again. But that being said, what about just normal health of your fish? How are they doing? Do they have abrasions on their body? Has the color of the fish itself changed in some way? Is it more pale, or has it reverted completely? And let's talk about, for example, my purple tang. I had this purple tang for 20 something years, right? No, not quite 20 years. And sometimes it would have a big white spot on the side of its body. And I didn't understand why. I thought that's so strange, because the tang doesn't have anything to cause that. So I'm thinking during the night it was rubbing against something, or something was touching it and basically leaving a white mark on their body. But by later in the day, that was gone. All right, I'm going to close the door because Jack won't stop. That will help. I listened to the video last week and I could hear that the barking was going on, and I thought, hey, this needs to be less loud. So in the case of the purple tang, like I said, the spot went away. So when you're looking at a problem in your tank, how long has the problem been going on with that fish? Is it something that's always there? Is it moving around the body to different areas? Another thing you might see with some of your fish, you may have clownfish that for some reason on the lower half of their body, you see little black dots. And they're kind of just scattered, sort of like buckshot. And you're thinking, how on earth did that happen? Well, sometimes it could be where the clownfish chooses to rest, or what it chooses to call its host, which could be zoanthids. Zoanthids can leave little black dots on their bodies, which is kind of funny because you don't see any black on the coral whatsoever, but that's usually what happens with a clownfish. You want to look at their eyes, make sure they're not cloudy, make sure there's not pop-eye. We want to make sure that their scales are nice and pretty throughout. You want to make sure their fins aren't tattered or eroded. And so these are all different signs of fish disease that you would want to get help, not from me, but from Humblefish. But hopefully you're not encountering much of that. And sometimes the biggest solution for fish when they're not doing so well is to improve their diet. So one of the things you can do is change food types from what you've been using. If you see an ongoing problem and it's not getting any better, despite you feel like this is the right food. Perhaps it's not. Now, you may have some finicky fish that may not want to switch flavors, and that's okay, but you can actually use a little bit of both foods, and hopefully through the combination of foods blowing through the water, the various fish will chew on the right food they prefer, and they might ingest some of the other food and get something that's missing in their diet. If you saw my picture last night that I posted on Instagram and Facebook, I shared a bowl of fish food with a bunch of pellets on top. And that's the TDK stuff from Easy Reefs. It's 4 different types of nutritional supplements that are in these 4 different types of pellet food. And it's really, really small pellet food. You know, it's probably like 1 millimeter. It's really tiny. So I just sprinkle that on top of the frozen food and let it sit for a few minutes for the food to thaw out. And then I just pour that in the tank and let them just chase down all the little nuggets of food. and everyone gets an opportunity to eat in all of my aquariums. And I have 4 total in my house right now. So I'm probably feeding about 50 fish each night when I feed the fish. Also, some people choose to feed their fish every other day rather than daily. Some people feed their fish multiple times a day. I don't like the every other day thing. I just don't like it. And I always equate it to what would you do for your own stomach. And I know they're not the same. We don't just walk around and inhale air and find nutrients. And we don't just lick the walls, right? Like fish will be biting onto rockwork looking for bits of algae or something to snack on perhaps. But to give your fish some food on a regular basis is way more nice in my eyes. I was going to say humane, but it's just feed your fish. And if you're worried about feeding the fish will cause problems with your aquarium, then you need to look at your filtration, because why is your filtration not able to keep up with you putting some food in the tank each day? It shouldn't be something to be worried about. You shouldn't say, I'm scared of phosphate, so I won't feed the fish. That's the wrong attitude. You feed the fish, you handle the phosphate. That's all you got to do. And the tank that's behind me right now, the phosphate tends to be somewhere between 0.25 and 0.75, depending on what week it is. And, I knock it back down, and sometimes I get it down to 0.1, sometimes I get even lower, and then it creeps up gradually over time, and I don't care. I don't worry about phosphate. I feed my fish because I feel like fish that have good nutrition and are, pretty hefty and chunky can usually ward off some of the fish diseases that might otherwise occur. And there's no reason to have supermodel fish. We don't need slender fish. We want to have nice, healthy fish that are active and are interested in the food and are out and about and very colorful. And you want to look, again, the fins, the tail, the pectoral fins on the sides. Make sure everything looks right. And if there's something not right, you might need to pull that fish out of the aquarium and put it in a hospital tank and give it the TLC it needs to recover. The interesting thing about fish is that they heal very, very quickly when conditions are better. And usually the best condition is really good water quality. And in a hospital tank, you can definitely have nice, clean water. You put a hang-on-back filter on the back to take out the particulates, you siphon out the detritus, and you do regular water changes, possibly daily, on that tank, and your fish will be in really good water, and then you're giving it the medicine it needs, you're giving it the nutrients it needs, and within mere days, that fish can turn around and look so much better. So we want to make sure that our fish are looking really good, really sharp, and that they're getting what they need in their bellies. I have a whitetail coal tang in my tank that developed these weird, not lesions, but more like pits in its face. And it was like this one cheek just became like a crater. And then there was this dot over the eye. And I was like, just like this dent. And I was like, what is going on with this fish? And remember, I had the fish vet out here to look at Spock. And when she looked at that fish, she says, I'm not sure what's going on there. It doesn't make any sense. But she said, you should lower your nitrate. And I didn't disagree. I mean, yes, my nitrates were high. I wanted them down. And but she said that should be the solution, possibly. Not should be. She thought that might be a possible solution. My other friend, Drew, was over here, and he says, that fish, I feel like it's lacking nutrients, and specifically, it's lacking the herbivore diet. How often are you putting nori in the tank? I was like, I don't know, once or twice a week. He says, I bet if you crank that up, that fish will turn around and get better. And I thought, how interesting. I hadn't really given nori a lot of thought. It's one of those things I do occasionally, like a treat. But he said, yeah, you should do it more often. I still struggle to do it more often. I mean, it's just not in my mind to put nori in the tank during the daytime. But today, I got up, and when I was doing something in the fish room, I put a half sheet of nori on my nori nibbler, put it in the back of the tank, and all the fish came over to it. And I am trying to be better about doing that. I'd say I'm probably doing 4 times a week now. I really need to get to 7 times a week. And it's just going to have to become a habit. I just have to make the morning coffee and put the nori in the tank or something like that and make it my permanent system. That way I know they're getting the herbivore diet that they need on a regular basis. And let me tell you, that coal has actually shown improvement in the last 6 to 8 months. And some of those holes have closed up and filled in. The worst one on the cheek that was so deep, it's filling in. It's still there, but it's better. And I have seen fish turn around. Let me tell you another story about a coral beauty I got many years ago. 20 years ago. I bought this used aquarium, and this coral beauty just had half of its body was just eroded. It looked terrible, but it was alive. And the other side looked okay, but it clearly struggled in the tank it used to be in. And, I just set up the tank like I set up a tank, and I had filtration underneath. I was cleaning my skimmer regularly. I did some water changes, and, I fed my food. And it was like 9 months later, that coral beauty looked perfect. All of it had recovered, the entire body. And I mean, it was unbelievable. And if I go digging through pictures from 2003 or 2002 or whenever that was, I probably can find a bad picture and then a good one and show you the difference. But you're just going to have to believe me, because I don't know if I'm going to do that much homework. But it really is remarkable how a fish can improve when the water conditions are straightened out. So it's really important that your water quality stay up to date. Now, since my whole premise of this conversation is to not talk about equipment, I am going to talk about things you should be doing as a hobbyist, especially if you're running a nano tank and you don't have a lot of equipment. Let me just imagine you have a 16-gallon or a 29-gallon all-in-one tank that's sitting on a cabinet or a dresser or the kitchen counter, and you have some fish in there, and you put food in there, and that's about it. And occasionally you might change the carbon in the back or something. Are you topping off the tank every single day manually? Are you pouring in that water daily? Or are you doing it when it gets down 2 or 3 inches? And you're like, wow, I really need to put some water in that tank. Because we want the water level to be the same height in the tank all the time, specifically to maintain salinity. The more water that evaporates out of the tank, the more salty the water will become. So one of my routines used to be, before I automated that, was to go ahead and pour water in the tank and put in the fish food, because I fed the fish every single day. So I put in water, I put in food. And I did it at night. So every night I did that. And it was just, the tank salinity was stable. And stable salinity is really important for your fish. It helps them stay healthy. And if it's going all over the place because you're just not getting around to it because of a lazy gene, I'm encouraging you to stop being lazy in that regard. And it's so easy to put those two jobs together. Now, if you have a smaller tank, you can just keep a jug of water near the tank and you can just reach down. Maybe it has a handle on the side. You can just pour it in. But eventually, it is nice to automate the top-off. And top-off kits are so inexpensive these days. I've seen stuff dirt cheap. I don't even know why they're that cheap. And I don't know if they're even reliable. But I've seen some less than $40, all the way up to, a couple of $100 for different types of top-off systems. But putting that on your tank is the number one thing you should do when you set up an aquarium. And having it just put in the top-off water constantly, and you refill a reservoir near the tank as needed, every 3 days, every 5 days, once a week, whatever it is, that should be part of setting up an aquarium, because it just makes life so much easier. But if you don't want to spend that money, if you're like, or you don't have the space and you just feel like you have to do it manually, do it daily. When I had a little tiny adorable tank on my kitchen counter for 9 months, 12 months, it was a 9 by 9 by 9 cube I'd made, and it held maybe 3 gallons of water. And I kept a 20-ounce bottle next to the tank, right behind it actually, because the tank had a black background. And twice in the morning, I had to pour in some of that water from that bottle, and then in the evening, I had to pour water in from that bottle because it evaporated so quickly. You could just see the water level just drop, and the salinity would change in there. And I had in that tank a little tiny clam. I had a seahorse. I had a bunch of zoanthids. That's about it. And it was a pretty little tank. The other problem with that tank was that it loved to overheat. So I kept a bottle frozen in the freezer too to float in the tank during the daytime and then take it out during the night, because it didn't have a problem at night when the light was turned off. But this was probably back in the days of using T5s when those bulbs were really, really hot. T5s are not as common these days. I mean, people still have them, but on a small tank, you'd probably have a small LED light, and you're not going to have a heat issue with that aquarium. Now, corals. Let's talk about corals, because there's so many kinds. You can have simple corals like green star polyps and leathers and colt coral and zoanthids, Nephthia. These are all mushrooms, Rickordia. These are all considered simple, easy, don't need great water quality, and they grow and grow and grow. They really will fill your tank out. And those that have been in the hobby for a while will swear off all the things I just mentioned, except maybe Rickordia. And they'll say, I'll never put that in my next tank ever again. And if I ever can rip this out, I will. Anthilia was an evil, evil one. Zinnia is pretty, but it grows abundantly, and people start hating that one too. Kenya trees, another one that people would say is so pretty. And then suddenly they had like 50 little Christmas trees in their tank, and like, I hate this stuff. So, but it's easy to grow. It grows quickly. It's great for new hobbyists because you're not looking at an empty aquarium. If you are a new hobbyist and you set up a brand new tank and you had unlimited funds and you got all the gear underneath and you've got all the filtration and you've put all your dry rock and your dry sand and you put your first SPS, it will feel like forever for that tank to fill in because an SPS grows ever so slowly, maybe a quarter of an inch a month, and it's just not much to look at. So you end up planting 20, 30, 40 of these SPS corals to have something to look at. And even then, it's going to take 9 months till that tank starts to really kick in. So it can be really frustrating, where with the softy corals, you put in something and it just gets bigger and bigger, and you're like, wow, look at this thing. And I love when people say, oh, this leather is huge, I got to get it out. And I'm like, well, I got to see this, I can't wait. And I'm scrolling through the pictures and it's just this big. And I'm like, that's not huge. That's not huge at all. That's awesome, but that's not huge. And I had one that was as big around as a trash can, like you have on the side of your house. It was that big. It filled a 33-gallon trash can when I took it out. Monster. And it grew from a piece this big. But I loved it. I came home with a frag of it from Macna. You might be getting corals from specific people and specific places where you associate a memory with that coral. I have certain corals in my tank that came from Drew. I have certain corals that came from my tank from Dwayne. I have certain corals that came from Ryan. I got some that came from Seachem. I have some that I've purchased at different shows, like Cherry Corals or Justin Spog, or which is North American Coral Labs. I got something recently from Tidal Gardens. I picked up something from Robert's Reef. I know where these things came from, and there is a connection. It's not just some random thing that came from somewhere on Earth. And to me, all those little different things that I have a story behind them, and they have a memory behind them, and I really enjoy that. Now, we want all these different corals we have that we have a connection with to stay healthy and grow. And we need to know about them. I saw a post yesterday where someone was talking about how they had a torch coral. And they said, I've had it for 2 months. It's been splitting for 2 months. And first thing I did was look at the picture. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Because corals don't take months to split, especially not torches and frog spawn and hammers. They just do their thing. They make a bubble, and then within a matter of days, you have 2 heads, even though it may not be super obvious. But then in a couple of months, you can definitely tell that there's 2 heads off that one branch. But his coral just looked shrunk down tight. It looked like it I don't know what time of day he took the picture. He could have taken it first thing in the morning before the lights came on. He could have taken the end of the day when the thing was exhausted because the lights are running too strong, too long. There's lots of different things to take into mind. It could have been it's sitting in an area with way too much flow. It could be it's just starving and not enough food in the tank, and the coral's just slowly shrinking, using itself up, trying to survive. But it's definitely not splitting for 2 months. I know that for a fact. But you need to know what it means when you say a coral is splitting. You need to know what it means when a coral is healthy and fluffy. That coral that you bought, you should know a lot about it. And the nice thing is, Google is a few keystrokes away from giving you the answers you need. Now, there can be some confusion when you go to one article and you read this, and you go to the next article and you read that, and they may not even agree with each other. But usually, if you've read 3 to 5 articles on the specific coral, torch coral, for example, you're going to get a baseline of knowledge that's going to be accurate. There may be some small things where 2 different authors disagree. That's okay. Maybe they had different experiences. But the overall thing should be the torch coral needs some light. Doesn't need all the light. It needs flow, but it doesn't need tons of flow. It needs food, and it might need to be target fed. And the one that was so shrunk down that didn't look happy, it's probably going to take weeks to get that thing to fluff up again, to get it to eat enough food to get better. It could be something is picking at it. It could be that a fish is nipping at that thing every single day, and that's why it's miserable. There's lots of different things that can happen, but if you don't know enough about that coral in question, then you're just guessing. You're just throwing stuff at it and hoping it'll work. And that's not what this hobby is. This hobby is about science. I just got to see a preview of an article in Coral Magazine, and this one person made a really interesting comment about putting an aquarium in your home. And they said something along the lines of that people are getting, and it's probably why I came up with this topic, people are getting lost in the equipment and they're missing the point of the science. When you get an aquarium, what's the first thing you start learning about? Water chemistry, science. Then you start learning about electricity. Well, I know it's not science, but it can be kind of a science when it comes to how it's wired. You have to learn about carpentry and have a strong, sturdy stand. You've got to learn about leveling, which is, again, a construction thing, but also comes into play when it comes to hanging pictures on the wall, right? You want them to hang level. You want your tank to sit level, and you want it to be stable. And you don't want the tank to do this when you walk past it, or if you stand in front of it and you jump up and down, you should not see shake. That tank should be stable. So you might learn that you need to support the floor from below, possibly from the basement area, or the crawl space. In my case, I'm on a slab foundation. There's nothing to change. Either the slab's going to hold that aquarium and everything else in my house, or I'm in trouble. But you're also going to learn other things. You're going to learn about photography because it's so hard to capture some things on camera, right? So you start watching videos, you start reading articles, you visit forums, and you start learning, what can I do with my camera? What can I do with my smartphone? What can I do with my GoPro to get better pictures? Is there an app I can download to clean it up and make it look better? I mean, there's so many different things, but you don't know this at first. You're just sitting there thinking, I got a fish, and I just want to take a picture. Why is this so difficult? So, and also, I didn't even mention, changing the color of your lighting before you take the picture makes it vastly easier too. And because of LED technology, we have the ability to switch the lights with one swipe of our finger in the app on our phone that controls that light hanging over your tank. There's other things we learn too, but it's a whole science experiment. I had one person send me a message today, and he said, "Do you know anyone that's running their aquarium off solar power?" Solar power. I said, "No, I don't. I don't know anyone that's doing it specifically. If someone said I'm doing it, okay, great, but I don't know anyone off the top of my head that has an aquarium that's running only solar and that it's doing it. I don't know." However, he replied, "I'm going to try that out with my aquarium." And I immediately said, "No, I do not recommend that you hook up solar to the life support of your livestock. Go test it on your water heater." If your water heater doesn't heat, no one's going to die of a cold shower. But if your equipment doesn't keep running because something's wrong with the solar, because you're trying it out, and your tank turns off, everything inside the tank will die. We want to make sure that everything is nice and rock solid and dependable. Can you switch to solar? Yes. Is it possible to have a completely solar home that has an aquarium? Yes, totally, when it's set up correctly. But then, do you also have battery backup, like the Tesla Powerwall, for example, for the solar panels to save the juice, so when you have bad weather days, the aquarium can keep operations? You know, if it's reliant on the sun only, then great, tank's doing great during the daytime, and then the evening, now what? And that's talking about an only solar home. So, you know, obviously tanks, homes that have solar and electric and switch back and forth, that's a completely different thing. And yes, it might be okay, but I wouldn't test it on an aquarium. I would test it on something that doesn't matter, like my toaster oven or something. Let's see if it can toast bread. I don't know. I don't want to affect my livestock. My livestock is everything. When I am standing in front of my aquarium, I am very picky about how everything looks. And trust me, lately, I've not been happy with what I'm seeing. I know the tank needs a reef set. It's pretty. Other people would wish they had the tank I had. I get that. But I'm seeing areas of the SPS that I'm not happy with, and I'm not even sure what's going on with it, but I don't like it. If you look from above, it looks great. If you look from the side, not so great. And the side view is what I am getting, obviously, because I'm standing in front of the aquarium looking at the side. So I don't know. But my buddy Dwayne's going to be here in a couple of weeks for Markna. And when that happens, he's just going to go in there and start fixing stuff for me while I'm on here talking to you guys. And that is totally fine. I have no qualms about that. Dwayne knows my tank. Now, when it comes to figuring out what's going on with your corals to make sure that they're healthy and that they're looking well, you're going to have to look at images of other corals online to get a sense of comprehension of what's normal versus what's not. A lot of times, newer people in the hobby, people that just are barely in, and they're getting their first few corals, and they might get some great deal off eBay, or they found some auction, or they just found a good deal at the fish store. They want to say, I want to try this, and try this. And you know what? That's an okay thing to do. We understand that. It's sort of like trying different foods at a restaurant you've never been to before. You're going to try it, and you just have to survive one meal. However, these are living animals. So when they come home with you, you need to be able to give them their best attention. And so we want to do things like secure it on the rockwork so it doesn't just roll under and die smothered in sand. We want to make sure it's getting adequate lighting, adequate water temperature, adequate food. There's all those things we have to keep in mind. But in the end, if you don't know how the coral is supposed to look when it's healthy, how could you know if your coral is doing well or poorly? It's not just a color thing. Just because it's glowing green doesn't mean it's great. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, the Great Barrier Reef had a really bad bleaching event that was all over the news. And then all the corals that had bleached started changing all these vivid colors. And it was actually really pretty. But that's actually a really bad sign when it comes to SPS corals. SPS coral, and I've seen this happen in my tank. I had this one colony, because back then that's what you bought. You didn't buy a frag, you bought a colony. It was this really pretty colony. I put it in my tank. I mean, it was nothing special. Matter of fact, it was probably in the brown family. And I put it in there, and it was just living. And I could see the polyps were extended a little bit. And I did my water changes. I fed my tank. I made sure the tank temperature never changed. All the things that mattered, right? And after a while, that coral kind of turned green, and then it leaned toward blue, and then it went into orange. And I was like, this coral is kind of going through a rainbow effect. How strange is that? And it wasn't rapid. It took weeks, but it was just doing these different color transitions. And I had a feeling, even though I didn't know, that was a bad sign. And then one day, the whole thing died. And I was like, aha, now I know. So when corals are changing colors, it's sort of like their last desperate yell for attention that they need help. And that's what happened to the Great Barrier Reef. They turned all these different fluorescing colors that were completely unusual for them. And it was probably because they had already shed some type of zooxanthellae. And then there was this other type in there that, again, it was a reaction. It's because the algae that's within their tissue, they use it, how do I say this? That algae absorbs light from the sun, and it allows it to consume the sugars within itself to produce energy for life and growth. And when it expels, excessive amounts, it can look very pale. It can even look white. It can completely bleach out, and it can eventually die. But if it's changing color shades like that and just going from, it was this big colony that was, I don't know, let's just say it was yellow, and suddenly now it's kind of a glowing weird blue, a pastel blue. You're like, what is happening? That's a coral on its way out. And it's unfortunate. Now, while some corals did die in that bleaching event, other coral, right now the Great Barrier Reef 3 years later is doing really, really well and has regained a ton of coverage and a bunch of new coral growth that has surpassed what it lost, which is great news. Florida, on the other hand, is losing corals left and right because of the heat wave that's been hitting the U.S., and it's going to take a while for what's left to survive and recover and rebuild. But in your own aquarium, if you don't know what an unhealthy gorgonian looks like, or if you have a coral but you never see the polyps come out ever, day, night, dusk, moonlight, morning, if it's never open, it's just a matter of time before it's going to be gone because it can't get food if it's closed up. So you want to see your reef and you want to explore your reef. You want to take a flashlight and go over the entire reef late at night. If you're up at 2 in the morning, go look at your tank. Hopefully you're not running moonlights. Some people like to run their moonlights like all night long, like it's a necessary thing, even though, as we know, the moon is constantly moving. Just like the sun, the sun moves in our sky. Obviously, the Earth is rotating and it's moving. The sun's not moving. But the sun is moving across our horizon, right? The moon does the same darn thing. And so while there could be full moon, there's also new moon. So our corals are not used to having a moonlight that runs from, midnight to 8 a.m. every single day. That's not normal. It's not typical. It's not real. So if you want to have moonlight for an hour or two at the end of your day, do it. Run it for a couple hours. Midnight, turn it off, let the tank be in pitch darkness, and then get out there with your flashlight and go check out and see what's going on, because a lot of your invertebrates will come to life. They'll be active. You'll see worms out. You'll see snails you've never seen before. You'll come across all kinds of cool little things. Maybe you might see some limpets. You might see some, I can see it in my mind, stomatella. I was trying to think of the name. You might see a peanut worm. That's a really cool discovery to find in your rock work. But all these things normally come from live rock, and you guys with your dry rock are missing out on all the cool critters. So if you can seed your tank with some live rock, that's an opportunity. Because I know all the corals that you buy, you put it through a dip to kill anything off of it, so all that's left is the coral, so you're missing out on some of the perks. And yes, I know there are pests out there, but that's okay. We can deal with pests. We just do. But in the end, we still have these beautiful reef tanks despite that pests exist. So really, it's nothing to be terrified of. It's just one of those things. It's just part of reef keeping. But I love exploring my reef at night. And Albert Thiel was an author back in the, he died a few years ago. He wrote quite a few books and publications and articles. And he came out with a little red flashlight. It was super small. And it used, I don't even know what it had. I don't even think it was even a AAA battery. I think it was even those small little button batteries. And you just twist the end, you have this red flashlight, and you point it into your reef because the livestock doesn't see the red light. And so it doesn't run away. And you could see worms and things you're trying to observe that won't immediately retract from like white light. And if you're holding your phone up with your flashlight, you're not only shining a light in the tank, but you know the phone has these circles that look like eyeballs. So you may have livestock that's going to think they're about to be attacked from a predator and will run away. So having something else like a red flashlight, and you can use a blue flashlight too if you like, it's a nice way to look at your livestock and see it fluoresce under the blue spectrum. The Zoor light came out from Orpheg years ago. I still have mine, and it's a really useful flashlight to look at those corals that you want to see glow in the middle of the night, but you can also explore the sand bed. You can watch your cucumbers eating. You can see if you have any little filter feeder clams on the rockwork. All these critters, all this life, that is what this hobby is about. And keeping that aquarium healthy and having all these different things living, that's the science experiment. That's the goal. And we are trying to do it long term. We don't just set up a tank and then walk away from it and that's it. We are tending to it and caring for it and making sure that everything's interacting properly. And if something isn't right, we are reaching in with our hand of God and making a change to make sure that everyone plays nicely. We put space between corals so that this coral can't sting this coral. We observe our fish, and if we see a lot of aggression, we try different techniques. We might take a fish and take it out of the aquarium for timeout. Or we may put a mirror on the side of the tank to create a new reflection so that fish will fight itself, which is a crazy thing, but it really works. We sometimes will do things like put a laptop in front of the aquarium showing clownfish in an anemone so that the clownfish in the tank know they're supposed to be in that anemone, and they're learning from watching another couple of clownfish. I mean, that people have done these things, and it ends up working. It's really neat. So this is where the magic is. It's not the gear. The gear definitely is there, so we don't have to, I don't know, blow air bubbles in the tank 24 hours a day. That would be exhausting. Can you imagine if you had to do everything manually, like you had some kind of an exercise bike next to your tank and you had to pedal it to provide the power to your tank? Can you imagine that? I mean, that would be great for your health, terrible for long-term longevity, because you can't keep pedaling for the rest of your life. There's no way. Even if you took shifts with your spouse and your kids, there's no way. It's just someone's going to fall asleep at the job, and the next day everything's dead. So we rely on electricity. We rely on battery backups. We rely on generators. Yes, the equipment is useful. It's a tool. It serves a purpose. But in the end, everything that's in the glass box or the acrylic box is what matters, because that's where all the magic is happening. That is the part people want to see when they come over. That's when they ask questions. They become interested. You know, it's very rare that you meet up for a family, let's say they invite you to dinner. And you're all talking about things at the table. It's very rare that the conversation comes up. Have you heard how the whale sharks are doing near Maui? Like they would think, no. Why? What have you heard? Did they die? They immediately brain goes to something negative. Because they're under the water out of sight. An aquarium is right there. It's right inside your home. It's a focal point. It's a conversation starter. It's a conversation ender. There is so much to observe. And oftentimes when people come over, they just stop and just look in the tank. And they just want to spend a few minutes just looking, mesmerized. And I'm, thinking, well, you have to go fix this. And they're still looking at that. I'm like, all right, I'll give you a minute. I understand. And, it's our opportunity when people come over to teach them what's in the tank. You may want to say things like, those are not plants, those are corals. Or you might want to say everything in there is alive. Everything, nothing is fake. Because a lot of times people assume a pretty biotope, probably half of it's 50% is fake or something. Like you've put in rubbery things for looks. Like, no, I grew that. I had a little piece this big, and now it's a colony this big. These are things that have been growing. That my tank is coming up on 10 years old. A lot has happened in 10 years. And, you can tell them you've been in the hobby for 25 years or whatever it is, but it becomes a conversation. And, as we converse about these things, you can also emphasize the point that it's not as hard as, if you believe this, it's not as hard as they've been told. Because a lot of times there's this weird myth that saltwater is so hard that you'll just give up. It's pointless. Don't do it. And I disagree, obviously. I wouldn't be doing this channel. If I would have done one video on this channel, that would have been the end of Me Loves Reef on YouTube. Because I would have said, yep, it's too hard, don't do it. And then I expect everyone to just watch that and believe me and not spend their money. But there are things that can make it more difficult, and usually it's neglect. The longer you ignore your tank and don't take care of those things that need to be done, the harder it's going to be to make the correction later. And when I was doing Reef Diary on this channel, I showed something I was doing with my aquarium pretty much every single day. I did 120-something videos in a row, 120 days in a row, and I had people chiming in saying, you've made me start working more on my tank. So thanks for this video. And I thought that was nice. I was glad to hear it because what I was doing wasn't unusual. I was doing those things to my tank anyway. I just never filmed it. And it would be so much easier if I was working on my tank and someone was filming me. Like if Caitlin was still here and I was just working on the tank and she filmed, a minute or two, we'd probably still be doing Reef Diary to this day. But for me to have to set up the tripod or relocate the camera and then cut this and edit it and voice over and build the whole video, it's a lot of work. And I just don't have the time at all to do that. So, occasionally I add a new one to the list. But the point is, that doesn't mean I don't keep working on my tank every day. Every day my tank needs some kind of TLC. Today, the only thing I've done so far is clean the glass, which it needed. And last night I refilled the top-off container because it was low. Evaporation has been really, really high this week. I don't know why, but it evaporated a lot more than I'm used to. Now, I do know I have a big fan that I added before I went to Comic-Con last month. And so while I was there, I had set up a temperature probe in the room that if the room got to a certain temperature, this big fan would blow on the tank. And I just never took it down. And so that fan has actually come on 2 or 3 times this week where I could hear it first thing in the morning. It was blowing on the tank. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And the tank temperature was actually good. I've actually had a change of temperature per day of 1.2 degrees. So 75.9 to 77.1 is my range. That fan has really locked it in even tighter. It was like 1.5 degrees. Now it's 1.2 degrees. So it's a little tighter. And so that's why there's a little bit more evaporation. So I had to turn on the RODI system last night to refill that container that was pretty low under the tank. And that way, that's taken care of. I have to look, today I'll have to look at my algae turf scrubber and make sure that, it's growing correctly, or do I need to clean it out again? I need to take the collection cup off my skimmer and clean it because it's been a while. I need to double check my Versa pump to make sure that the tubing is calibrated correctly, or do I need to replace it again? So these are some of those little things I'll need to do today on water test Saturday. I got to test my tank and see where the parameters are. So there's an example of things I have to do with my tank that if I were to ignore those things and wait 2 or 3 weeks to get around to it, well, number one, my return pump will be sucking in air. I'm blowing bubbles in the tank. I'd start losing some livestock because that invariably happens when things get weird. The calcium reactor would not be getting the water flow it's supposed to get from the Versa, so the alkalinity would be plummeting. So I'd be losing corals from that. As the corals die, it's going to create problems in the water column, which can affect, and I could start losing some fish. The protein skimmer doesn't care, but it probably won't work like it should, so the water is going to get a little dirtier. Nutrients are going to rise higher, plus we've got the die-off happening in the tank. So you see how there's a cascading effect of not doing your regular things for your aquarium. So we want to make sure that we're looking at everything once a day. And that used to be my number one rule that I talked about. I haven't talked about this in forever. Every day you should look at your aquarium and just look at everything. You should look at the top of the tank. You should look underneath the tank. You should look around the tank. You should look in the tank. And you want to make sure everything is as it should be, that nothing's changed. For example, let's say you have a power head in the tank and it's always in this one spot, but today it fell down and it's kept running and it blew all the sand to the other end of the tank. And there's this giant mountain of sand over here. That would be something you need to fix today. You can't let that go. And so you correct it. If you have U-tubes on the top of your aquarium for the to drain down into the sump, if those tubes are starting to fill up with air, less water is draining than what water is being pumped up in the tank because there's less gallons per hour going down the drain. So you want to make sure that those U-tubes are completely full of water with no air at all. And that's one of those things I used to do years ago. And I had a little piece of sign material on the top to keep algae from growing. I would just lift it up, make sure there's no air in the pipe, put the lid back down. That was it. Just had to do that once a day. Just lift the lid, look, put it down. It takes 3 seconds. And I did it every single day of my life. And I never had a problem with that tank overflowing. So those kind of things. I always looked at the output of my calcium reactor. These days I don't have to because of the automation of what I've got under the aquarium. I can get notifications when things change. But of course, when I'm standing behind the aquarium looking down in the sump, I will look down at the tube coming out of the calcium reactor. I want to make sure it's trickling and not just dripping, or even worse, nothing coming out. So I look for that visual. You know, I glance at the top-off container to see how full of water it is, but I have a ruler in there that tells an app on my phone how much water is left. And so I can open the app and look, but I'm standing in front of the tank. I can just look down and say, yeah, I've still got 6 days worth of water left. I've got 3 days worth of water left. So visually inspecting things is really important. You should also be looking at the seams of your tank because the seams are holding all the water in. And if they appear to be looking different, if they're looking cloudy, smoky, whitish, grayish, might be time to take a picture right now and then take another picture a week from now and a week after that and a week after that and then compare the pictures. Is it progressively getting worse or is it still the same seam that it's been all this time? And it just is a weird spot because we don't want to wait until the tank lets go and floods the room. We want to be proactively aware of what's going on with our aquarium. Now, if you have a tank that has a weak seam that you're really scared of, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of options when it comes to just like squirting some magic glue into the corner of the tank and hold water. There is a product on the market. It comes from Germany. It does exist. It ain't pretty, but it's made for emergencies. So yeah, I'm halfway tempted to buy it just to have it sitting on the shelf. But odds are the day I need it, I'll number one, not be able to find it, or number two, it expired or no longer works. Because, you know, I mean, that, isn't that how Murphy works? But packing tape that has the threads in it, you know, the really strong packing tape, you can buy that stuff and you can clean the glass of your aquarium really, really well. You know, really clean it. Windex and water is fine, vinegar and water, and then wipe it down with some rubbing alcohol to get any kind of salt film off that glass so it is pristine. And then you just put one strip of tape, another strip of tape, another strip, and we're putting the tape across the front and the side, and we're basically pulling the panel against the other panel and taping. And you might have this much tape, you know, just strip, you know, I don't know what that is, 15 pieces, and maybe about 6 inches on this side and 6 inches on this side. And you just make that strong corner to hold the tank together because it's in a crisis. And that is one way that's one thing I did with my 400 gallon when it sprung a leak. I taped the corner together just to keep the tank together until we could get the livestock out. And that way I didn't have to worry about it just letting go even more. And because right now I just had a pinhole leak that was squirting water on the floor. And so I drained the tank, obviously, but I didn't want the remaining water and the pressure of the tank and everything to just let go, and which it would. So having a good visual of your aquarium, of every bit of it, even looking at the top of your tank. If you have a rimless tank, you should be looking at the four corners all the time and making sure that they have a good solid bead and that they haven't started to separate a little bit at the top. And one of the things that you would have to do to see that is keep it clean. So you need to wipe it down with a sponge and visually inspect all four corners. It's very important. And if you have Euro bracing, you want to look at the Euro bracing, just look at it and make sure that the glass that's sitting crisscross looks normal. Or if you have two pieces butted together with silicone, is it still siliconed or did it separate apart? Which means that the tank has now shifted and it is starting to pull itself apart. You may not be able to just squirt new silicone in there to fill that little gap because that gap didn't exist in the first place. Something shifted and pulled it right off the silicone. That's something to be worried about, something to inspect. And probably time to double check that the tank is level again and make sure that everything is correct. So that's kind of it. I just want you guys to really make an effort to think about the livestock itself, because a lot of times we get caught up in the whole, here's a new piece of gear, it's on the market, I need to buy this. And that can happen. I had someone that asked me once, and I've told the story before, I'm sorry if I'm repetitive to some of you long-time viewers, but he called me up and he says, have you heard about this new product that removes nitrate? I'm like, no, I haven't. And so he sent me a link and I looked it up and it was interesting. And I said to him, okay, what is your nitrate level? And he said, they're nothing. I said, then why do you need this thing? And he was like, you just saved me $500. And I was just like, you were going to buy it when you don't have a nitrate problem? And he just got caught up in the idea of getting this piece of equipment. And I was like, yeah, you don't need it yet. When you need something, sure, buy it. But if there's not a problem, you probably don't need that piece of gear. And I tend to look at my tank as if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I don't make a lot of sweeping changes. Even when something new does come in, I want to hook it up. Or like, for example, I had Chris Meckley on this channel a couple years ago, I guess, maybe a year ago. And we talked about kalkwasser. And we talked for 2 hours. And by the end of 2 hours, I was kind of sort of convinced maybe I sort of might want to try it. So I ended up buying a box of his magic powder. That magic powder is still in the box the day it arrived, just sitting in the corner of my kitchen for if I ever do it one day. Because technically, my tank has been growing and doing well. So why do I need kalkwasser now? I've done this hobby for over 2 decades without kalkwasser. So I have chosen that I bought it. I might want to try something out, but at this time, I just don't see the need. So I haven't done it yet. But I have, I have that option. I have the flexibility to choose. But again, I'm thinking, well, how's the livestock acting now? Is there a definitive reason why I should incorporate this new thing into my tank to make things even better? If we had a magic piece of equipment, yeah, I can't think of one. If we had a magic piece of equipment that removed phosphate, and I'm not talking about geoflow reactors, I'm just saying if there was this piece of equipment that removes phosphate, I might be interested in that. But for now, I can just drip in phosphate RX and it solves the problem. It's so easy. And I've been using that stuff for, I don't know, 11, 12 years, and it just does the job. So I don't need a piece of equipment for that. And I don't have to worry about it because I count some drops every couple of months. It's so easy. There's just no effort. It doesn't even need a dosing pump. I count 125 drops. That takes me maximum 2 minutes. And then I don't do it for 8 weeks. Pretty simple stuff. Okay. Let's see if we have any questions in here from you guys yet. If not, now's the time to ask your questions. I'm here to answer them and do the best I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. But I am always happy to try to help you be successful. Khalil says it's his first time here. They managed to watch the show live. Well, I'm glad you did. You're going to have the easiest time when Markna happens. So Markna is going to run for 24 hours straight. It's on September 9th, and it's going to end on September 10th. And if you can't somehow find a way to be live with that, that means you slept for over 24 hours. Reefer Madness, we actually did a video about this topic. He said, my tank has gone down since I've had 2 kids. I haven't had any time to do anything, and everything is slowly dying off. I wish I could get the fire lit back in my heart to get it back to par. That's the hard part. You're going to have a lot of work ahead of you to get it back up because, like you said, you had to neglect it for a long duration. But we did a video with Devin Rich, who was on this channel, where we talked about trying to run a reef with a newborn in your household. So that might be a good video for you to watch. Maybe it'll motivate you. He's got a lot of gear and he's got a lot of pretty tanks going on right now, at least two. And he somehow is making it work now. He dropped off doing YouTube videos. And I know he, for a while there, he just had everything running on autopilot, but he didn't ignore it. And of course, the other thing is you have your kids to look at the aquarium with you. And if your kids are picking out things to put in the tank, like let's say you let them pick out a couple of clownfish, now they're interested in the tank with you, and you are trying to keep the fish healthy that they chose, that they named, and maybe that's the kind of thing that will kind of motivate you again to get things back on track. But I get it. I understand. When things are rough, it's tough. When I lost Caitlin, it was really hard for me to care about my tank at all. It was really, really hard. And I just struggled my way through it. But I couldn't ignore it because all those animals in there were relying on me to keep them healthy and happy. Alia says the Achilles is looking hot with 3 T's. Yeah, that little Achilles is doing great. Rick says, does Purigen remove silicates from the water? Good idea to add as a last stage on an RODI. I don't know the answer to that one at all. I do know there was a filter available, probably from SpectraPure, possibly on BRS, that was a silica buster, which was a cartridge. I don't know that it was filled with Purigen. I have no idea what was in there. I just knew it existed. Have you actually measured detectable silicates in your tank via ICP testing? Have you come across some high number that you're trying to resolve? But I don't have the answer even to does it remove silicates. I believe Purigen was a nitrate reducer, if I remember correctly. But maybe it does both. So, but I would think that would go in a reactor like GFO or carbon and just hook up to the tank, not be something on the RODI. I just saw this. Why does it take me an hour to notice? Wind or Water says the sound is different, not as bad as usual. Wouldn't it help if I picked the right microphone? How about now? This might be a little bit better. We were using the one that was in the computer all this time. I thought I had switched it over, or I thought it had detected it, but it had not. Even though I'm wearing it, and I've got it here showing me the little meter back, and I thought that Testing, testing. I think we have sound. Wow. That was probably 15 minutes of no sound. All right, I feel a little annoyed. All right. So what do you want me to... Did you guys at least read my lips the whole time so you know what I said? Ah. Ridiculous. All right. Someone says he's back here. 5 stars. How annoying! You'll never know. My God, the things I shared with you, they were super personal and private, and I'll never share them again. But yeah, you got you missed it. Like I said, you have to read my lips. You know that Google, YouTube actually transcribes these, but with no audio? I don't know how it's going to do that. Oh boy. Well, that is super weird. I don't know why it lost it. I mean, when I switched, I looked and I could see it was working, and then I just got into the conversation again. So, feel free to ask new questions. Yeah, I know, James says, just start over. Yeah, okay, so let me talk about Jessica's GoFundMe, because that's an important one. And thank you for hanging out there with me this long. I feel like such a dummy. I mean, I literally have a thing on my screen. I wish I could show you, but it has the green thing bouncing. Somehow it just lost it during this for no reason whatsoever, because when you guys said the audio wasn't working, I switched it and I watched it and it was working. So I don't know why it just suddenly decided to give up. But all right, Jessica's GoFundMe. So last week I shared a video, I shared a link in the video saying, someone says he confessed to a double homicide, but we'll never know. She said she was raising money for her employees that no longer had a job. And some of those people might have even lost where they lived. 2,200 buildings burned down in Lahaina, and I think 73% of that was residential. So that means 27% were businesses. And so her company is gone, right? Burned to the ground. The building's gone. All the vans that she took people out in, gone. It's just gone. And so I was thinking she'll be okay. I know Jessie. She has a savings. She has insurance. You know, she's a business owner. Well, I talked to her on the phone 2 days ago, and I found out that the insurance she was paying for month after month won't cover the shop, which is insane. She told us in the video she shared on YouTube yesterday that she had the Dan insurance. And, you know, as a scuba diver, I buy Dan insurance. It's supposed to cover my trip, it's supposed to cover my gear, it's supposed to cover cancellations. If something bad happens and I suddenly have to be put in a hyperbaric chamber, it'll cover that. I don't really believe it'll do all that, but they say it will, and if I ever needed God, I hope it works. But she had a version of that was for her shop. She bought the dive shop Dan insurance, thinking she was protecting her shop from all the bad things that happen. And then when this fire happened and she tried to file, you know, a total loss, they said she's not covered, that it was liability only. So she did her video where she explained, I hope if any of you out there have the same insurance I have, go double check your fine print, because I'm left with nothing. And, you know, at this point she needs a new building. She needs all the contents that goes in the building. She needs the vehicles. She needs the products. Now that you can start to buy product again to sell again. She has to have instructors, you know, and, you know, it's a whole thing. It's a disaster. So this week I'm going to share a different GoFundMe on this video that's to help rebuild her shop, because now she's asking for some help to get her shop going because she thought she was covered. And I just can't believe it. I think she needs a good lawyer. I thought FEMA could help her, but she already asked, and FEMA said, no, we're only helping residential. They're not even helping businesses. So then, you know, you think the government would offer some kind of grants or whatever. Now, someone else told me yesterday, even if FEMA does help you, that's a loan. You have to repay the government. I didn't know that either. I always thought FEMA was kind of like this thing that's set up to help people in disaster get back on their feet. I had no idea it's something you're signing up for, a loan you got to pay back. So, I mean, it's bad enough you don't have anything, and now you're trying to get into a new place to live, or you're trying to, you know, in this case, get a new business running. and you got to come up with the money to cover all that you're borrowing. It's a disaster. So she put out a GoFundMe. I'm going to share it on this video, and if you can contribute to help her get things going, I know she's going to appreciate it. It's going to be a big haul to build that from nothing. She's already started to drive around looking for a new location to set up a shop because, you know, business has to continue, money has to come in. You still got to make the house payment and pay the electric bill and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that was a really bad news. It's shocking, unbelievable. But, you know, I also thought maybe the insurance is just saying no because that's what insurances do. You make a claim, they automatically say no, and then you fight, and then finally they cave. But I don't know. I'm not there. I'm definitely not in the middle of this conversation. I'm just relaying what she told me, which sounds awful, and I'm very worried for her, obviously, and her future. So if you guys can help, that'd be great. Okay, the seahorse question that I talked about, so privately. Number one, I would say that the person to talk to might be Felicia McCauley. She's on Facebook. She is my seahorse expert. There's many others out there, but that's one name that's in my head. And Felicia helped me with mine. Now, the person asked, can I put gorgonians? What else can I put? And the only thing I could think of that seemed very safe that wouldn't sting a seahorse would be leather corals. So a finger leather would be nice. Maybe Kenya trees would work because those don't sting. And they give something for the seahorse to latch its tail onto, to hold onto. Those kind of soft corals would probably be fine. I would avoid things like zoanthids because zoanthids have palytoxin, and as I mentioned earlier in this stream, the dots that you see on a clownfish body come from rubbing against zoanthids. So if you had a seahorse rubbing, I would expect you'd see the same black dots on the seahorse as well, and you don't necessarily want that to happen. Now with my own little seahorse tank, I had some zoanthids in there, but I never saw any weird spots. I never gave it a moment's thought at the time because I was new to seahorses. But now that I know some stuff, I would just talk to some other people that keep seahorses and see what other living things you could put in there. Possibly a cocoa worm would be a good one because they have that nice thick tube. Again, the tail could hold on to that. Feather dusters could work. They have the Hawaiian feather duster. Because this is a tank you're going to feed a lot. Seahorses consume food readily, and they'll eat multiple times a day, but they don't digest it all. They poop out something like, I don't know, I think they digest 1/3 of what they eat, and the rest comes out still food. So that food will then land on other things for the other things to eat it. So having other filter feeders in the tank is actually a good thing because you're feeding seahorses and then the food's getting to everything else. So that can work in your favor. But you want to make sure you don't have things in there that sting the seahorse. And that's why you don't have a heater in the seahorse tank, because the heater could burn the seahorse. And they never want to have Aptasia in the tank because the Aptasia can sting the seahorse. But I would ask Felicia. And then, of course, you could probably find some videos on this channel, on YouTube, that talk about seahorse care, and you can find some other things. Let's see. What else did I talk about that you never heard? I see so many comments like, no sound, no sound. I feel like such a dummy. That was a glitch that was not preventable without me starting to listen to myself echo in my ear, which I don't really want to do. All right, let's see. All right, I'm skipping past all the comments here that said they can't lip read that. Thank you for saying that, Paul. I can't lip read that fast. Winterwater says, do you ever have a trace element problem that's either too low or too high because you never talked about it? You always talked about potassium once from what I know. I've talked about potassium a lot. I have also talked about things like manganese, cesium, selenium, vanadium. These are all different trace elements that I only know about from my ICP testing. And so I was dosing them manually. I've been dosing them manually for a long time. And then about 3 months ago, I changed over to a system where I take a 1-gallon jug, I fill it up with RO water, and then I put in all my trace elements in there. I add up all the milliliters, and I divide it by like 10 days or whatever. And that's me really, okay, let me not summarize it quite that hard. I wanted to have enough trace elements for a duration. So like, for example, if I needed 9 drops of MT, which is a product from Isolate that is made for algae turf scrubbers, and I need to put in 9 drops a day. 9 times 7 is 56, right? So I put in 56 drops into my gallon of water, my half gallon of water in my 1 gallon jug. And then I put in 20 milliliters a day times 10 days of calcium carbonate into that jug. And I put in 15 milliliters a day of vanadium into that jug. And then I took all the milliliters. So I had my 2,000 milliliters of RODI water, and then I had my 12 milliliters of this, I had 2.5 milliliters of that, I had 20 milliliters of this, I had 220 milliliters of this. Added all my milliliters till I knew exactly what was in the jug, which might have been like 2880, divided by 10. I needed to put in 28.8 milliliters a day, so I put in 29 milliliters a day of the solution, and then the jug, or that's not right, it was a higher number, it was 290. I'd put in 290 milliliters a day, and by day 10, the jug was empty. And then I'd refill it. And that has been so much nicer than having to stand over the tank and hold a syringe here and a syringe here and do the drops into the water column. Because I did that for months because I had trust issues. And then finally I said, okay, now I can mix all these up in one jug. That's fantastic. Now, there are certain things you can't put in the jug. So you want to find out what can be combined versus what can't. Lots of trace elements can be put together in the same jug of water and then dosed with a dosing pump. But other things like potassium need to be standalone. They need their own pump. So you want to figure out which one can be with and which one cannot, and then set up as many or as few pumps as possible. Chris Meckley is the one that told me this method, and I thought, man, that sounds fantastic. And he mixes up one big, I think a bucket, and has a single dosing pump that puts in all the trace elements for that bucket's worth of solution. And he does an ICP test every single week because he lives basically within driving distance of reef labs. And so he gets his results instantly, and then he adjusts his concoction. His recipe for the next week will be slightly different, and he burns through that bucket. And then he's got another test, and then he keeps doing it. Now, for us hobbyists, we may do an ICP test once a month, once every 2 months. So you would make your batch to be for now, but then eventually you're going to send in a test, and you may have to adjust your recipe of what all is in the jug. But that has been what I've been doing, and it's been working really well in my tank. It's just time that I'm waiting for my new ICP results. I sent in 2 samples this week. I sent one to Reef Moonshiners, so that's going over to Germany, to Ocean Mo to be measured, and I sent another sample to Reef Labs. So when I get the Reef Moonshiners back, I can kind of look at my Reef Labs just for side-by-side comparison because I'm curious, and just see if they agree with each other, because that would be ideal, right? I'd love for them to agree with each other. But regardless, once I get my results back from Reef Labs, which will probably be on Monday, then I will go ahead and mix up my next jug and get that going in the tank again because the jug's been empty. Jim Stickles says, he was talking about the part when I was quiet and had no audio. He says, so we can play the game of guess what he's saying. Whoever is closest gets to feed Spock. That's hilarious. Michael says, it's like he's just talking to himself. I was talking to myself like a lunatic. Martin says, I knew I should have learned to lip read. And Andrea says he's going to be so mad. You are right. I'm kind of pissed. And yes, my phone is on Do Not Disturb when I do these live streams. Let's see. Will, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Sorry I didn't see it till now. I should come up with a whole new thing to narrate over that section when this video is uploaded. I wonder if I can upload an audio track to fill in the void. Like just some ridiculous elevator music. That would be hilarious. Okay. Yeah, I'm caught up to all the questions. I did it. So whatever else you missed during the 15 minutes of self-mute elation, it is what it is. It was an accident. Oh boy. Something else I'm going to do this weekend. This is an opportunity for me to put something on the screen. It's hiding behind me. Can you see me? Let me move myself. So, this weekend, I'm doing a water change in my tank, and I'm using Fritz salt. So I want to thank Fritz for being a sponsor of my channel. I really appreciate that. And I will be changing probably about 100 gallons of water on my reef tank, and then I'll feel like I've done a good thing for my reef. Now, how do I get my video back? That's not it. This happens every time. There I am. I'm back. Alien says, is there a way to get Coral Magazine without a credit card? It might be possible to mail a check, I would think. I'm not positive, but I can try to find out. If you'll send me a message, then I will, because I need your email address so I can contact you. And that way I can reply and get you and let you know what I find out. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to throw it on the screen again. Coral Magazine, this is the issue that is out currently right now, but a new one is about to come out. It will start showing up in mailboxes probably next week. And then we'll have a new cover to look at with news stories. And Coral Magazine is the one magazine I'm a subscriber to. I've been a subscriber for probably 10 years. And I have a lot of issues here. And they're filling up 2 of my shelves with just all the issues. And I'm missing a bunch too. I'm kind of disappointed. I don't know where some of them are, but I kind of want to go, you can actually order back issues also to fill in the voids, which is kind of cool too. But Coral Magazine always has stories that help hobbyists as well as aquaculturists, as well as scientists. I mean, there is a lot of information in each one. And I would not say that the magazine is over your head by any means to where you have to really know a lot. You can learn a lot in it. So it definitely would be beneficial. And it doesn't cost a lot. There are 6 issues a year. I think it's something like $45 a year or something. Maybe it's higher. Maybe it's 50. I don't know. But I do sell the magazine for my shop at Milo's Reef. So if you want to just buy one, I can mail it to you for about $5 or $6, and you can try one out and see what you think. And if you think it's fantastic, like I think you will, you could then subscribe. And believe it or not, there's actually a link I found somewhere buried in my YouTube. It's just coralmagazine.com/Milev is a link that will just kind of show that you came from my channel to buy it. I don't get anything out of the deal, but I think it helps them track where stuff comes from. So if you want to buy it from my shop, I will mail it to you myself because I have 5 or 6 issues in stock at all times. And you can find them on milosreef.com. And then, of course, you can get the subscription. But please do send me a message. You can email me at sales@milosreef.com, or you can email me at mark@milosreef.com, and I will find out if you can mail a check, or, I don't know, mail them a $100 bill and get several years' worth. I don't know what else you want to do. I mean, credit or debit card seems to be the standard these days for that kind of stuff. I'm going to throw this up on the screen too. So Markna is going to be September 9th, starting at 9 a.m. Central Time, Texas time. And it will go every single hour until 9 a.m. September 10th, which is Sunday. This is the weekend after Labor Day. There are 24 speakers. There's 24 raffles. The raffle money is being used to, it's going to Coral Restoration Foundation. There's going to be a lot of knowledge. Hopefully we'll have audio the whole time. I'm having people flying here to help me do the show and run the gear in the background so I can just focus on the presentations and the interviews and all that. But it will be very professionally polished, and I feel like you're going to have a great time. And I pray that this will not feel at all like some kind of Zoom thing, because I can't stand those. I want this to look and sound great. And, barring today's little goof that I had, which was an accident, I would think that you're going to have a really good experience, and we're going to have a lot of time to talk with each other and catch up and learn tons of topics. And there's going to be topics from scuba divers and from shop owners that are selling corals. There's going to be a whole thing about clams. There's going to be spawning information. I mean, there's so many topics, and I'm really looking forward to getting this done, because the planning part has been a lot of work. And if you want to learn more, you can go to marcna.com, marcna.com, and you can learn all about the event and see the schedule and figure out who you're going to want to see. Okay, let's go to our next question. Will says, can turbos mess up your water quality? Because I added 2 large turbo snails and one started spawning for 3 days. Spawning events in our aquariums can sometimes be a problem. It depends on the water volume. So, for example, I have 450 gallons of water. If I have some turbo snails spawning, or if I have, like last year, I shared a video of all of my baby brittle starfish spawning. And I must have 10,000 of them because the water got cloudy. When it's really dense, very cloudy, then water change would be the first step. Actually, air stone in the tank first, then water change, and then of course clean and get your protein skimmer working like it should. And if you have filter socks, swap them out immediately, because the cloud can be too much for the system. I've only one time had a spawning event so great that I was worried for the future of my reef. Normally, when I see spawning happening in the reef tank, I just assume it's food for all those little SPS mouths, and they'll just inhale it, and that'll be the end of it. But when you have 20 or 30 anemones spawning at once, it can really mess up the water. And so you want to make sure that you have adequate oxygen in the water. And that's why I was saying the air stone. So if you put an air stone, with an air pump that's pushing air into the tank, that'll help a lot in making sure everything's okay. But, it really comes down to the size of your aquarium. Outdoor Freedom says, I'm getting back into the hobby. I'm starting with a Red Sea Nano Max with 2 clones. What fish would you put in with them? I'm thinking about a goby and maybe a small wrasse or dotty back. How small is that nano? How many gallons? And then I'll answer your question. And yes, Santana Reef is right. There's only 1 year that's not available. There was a transition from one publisher to the other. That is true. And I have some of those early years as well. But then there's a few years where I just don't have any. I guess I just didn't subscribe for a while. But that changed in the 2010s, and I started staying subscribed nonstop. And that's why I have so many issues. So waiting for Outdoor Freedom to get back with that number that I'm looking for. Huang Tran says, does changing different salt affect the tank? Not really, but if you're wanting to be more gradual about it, because let's say you used Instant Ocean and now you're using Fritz. You might want to do a series of smaller water changes instead of maybe your normal size water change. See, for me, a normal size water change is about 20 to 25% of the tank. And the general rule of thumb is to change 25% once a month. And that's kind of what I live by, even though I don't do it very often. But I mean, if I was doing something, I'd be doing that once a month. So in my system, I need to change about 110 gallons every 4 weeks. And that would be 25% of my tank. But if I was switching salts, like I did, I switched from Aquavitro to Fritz, and I did like a 60-gallon water change. So that's more like 11% of my tank. I think that's right. It's just a smaller amount, but you can do smaller water changes and the tank probably won't skip a beat. What really matters when you're doing a water change, and I say this all the time, and I just repeat myself so that you guys will never forget, make sure the temperature is the same, the salinity is the same, and the pH is the same. If you have temperature, salinity, and pH the same as the tank, you can change as much water as you want. But when you're changing brands of salt, if you're just concerned that maybe there's something different in the way the elements are mixed, you could do smaller water changes every day, every other day, or you could do weekly water changes with little ones, and then get back to you're doing one big one once a month, and that'll be totally fine. But you shouldn't really have too much. I mean, in essence, all salt mixes are salt, but one brand may have more magnesium than another. One may have more potassium than another. One might have more iodine than the other. So that's why switching brands, you want to be a little bit more cautious to maybe do smaller ones just to avoid some kind of, I don't even want to use the word shock, but reaction by the livestock. I do like that the water is nice and clear though. And if your water isn't clear, if it's kind of cloudy, not a big fan of using that water. So if you mixed up a batch of water and it just won't stop being cloudy, then I would turn off the circulation in that bucket or barrel of water, and I would let it sit for probably 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And then I would scoop some water out and see if it's clear. You know, like if you have I have a nice glass beaker, I can scoop it. If it's crystal clear, it's good to go. That means all the stuff that was in suspension that made it look kind of cloudy has collapsed to the bottom, sitting as sediment on the bottom. I can now pump out all the clear liquid into my tank without the sediment, because I just don't like pumping in cloudy looking water into my reef and waiting for my reef to get back to looking clear again. It just bothers me. I don't know that it bothers them, but it bothers me. So that was something I was doing with my previous salt. I would let it sit and settle, and then I would pump the clear liquid into my tank, and I just felt better about it. All right, let's see. Okay, so it's a 20-gallon tank. Thank you for replying. A couple of clowns, a goby, and you said you wanted to add a wrasse or dotty back. Your tank's pretty small. I wouldn't want to overload it with fish. I think if you use tiny fish, you mentioned gobies, and there are some gobies out there. You could get the clown goby. Those are small. You could get the neon gobies. Those are really small, and they're adorable. That just reminded me of tiny things, and then I got to talk about that. But I'm trying to think of other fish. You could put firefish in there, but they're known jumpers, so your tank needs a cover. And even a net, the firefish can go right through the net. So it's got to be really covered to keep them from jumping out. My little 27-gallon has a angelfish in it, a goby, it's a Randall goby, and it has a hellfreaky. And they've been in there for the last year. And then I added a pistol shrimp. And now, the thing I want to talk about. I was trying to think of tiny things, and then it occurred to me, I bought a sexy shrimp, and I put that in Caitlin's reef, and I have not looked for it. I've got to go look for it today and see where it is, because it was this small. It was so tiny. And I'm very curious to see how it's doing, if it's doing well or not. I have no idea. I got to go find it. And it'll be hard to find in a 27-gallon aquarium. That's for sure. But the other thing I got that I put in the 400-gallon last week, I bought it last Sunday. That's why you haven't heard yet. I bought a tiger cowrie, which is about the size of, oh, is that the size of a lemon? And I put it under the lithophyllon, and I watched it go straight toward the back, which is rock. So it's just like there was this little like alcove, and it went under there, and it's vanished. I haven't seen it in 6 days. I have no idea where something the size of a lemon went in my 400-gallon, and it has not surfaced or appeared again. And I'm just astounded that I can't find this thing. Now, I'm sure it'll show up, and maybe it'll show up when I get up from this stream and go look at the tank. But I don't know where this ginormous thing went. That is a snail. It's a slug. And my glass was dirty, so there's all that food on the glass it could have eaten. And that's why I cleaned the glass today. But I'm like, where did this thing go that's so big, and how am I not finding it? Now, the new maize coral that I got, I think it's a gonastria. That thing's gorgeous. It's got purple centers and then green margins. and it is really pretty. And it's in the middle of my reef next to the lithophylon. And I shared some pictures on Instagram of that thing and showed the bottom of it and the top of it and how I dipped it. And so if you haven't seen those pictures yet, you can find them on the Instagram Me Loves Reef page. And what else did I add? Because I came home with several things. Oh, I came home with a flame scallop. Now, he had an electric flame scallop, but it was too big. It was just a giant one, and I thought, I want something kind of the right size. And I put that in Caitlin's reef. So I've been putting things in her tank that I feel are, that like dirty water, because there's really minimal filtration on that tank. There's live sand, there's live rock, there's an air stone, there's the Sicce Shark Pro that just has some sponges inside it to catch particulates. And I take off the basket once. I've been taking off twice, once every 2 weeks, but now I'm gonna do it weekly because I took it off after 1 week and the screens were just covered with this sludge. So I need to stay on top of that to keep capturing this stuff. And I feel like there's enough stuff in the water and I'm feeding enough to feed the Gorgonians that clam should get food too. I also have a product from Easy Reefs that I haven't used yet. It's a type of phytoplankton. So I'm going to start using that as well. And I feel between that, I might have success keeping the flame scallop alive. Flame scallops notoriously are difficult to keep healthy and alive and long term because we just usually can't supply enough food. But in tanks where they're being heavily fed, like non-photosynthetic tanks, those are perfect for those types of clams and scallops. And so I got one. It's really pretty. Of course, it picked a spot kind of not in the front where I would have appreciated it more, but it picked a spot kind of in the horseshoe area and it's there and I can see it. But when I put in the Fluxorex to get rid of the green hair algae, it'll be a lot easier to see that scallop. And I'm looking forward to it. It's bright red. It's really pretty. And I'll see what I can do about getting some kind of a picture to show you guys. But that was a really cool addition. I haven't had one of those in forever. And I thought, this is the perfect tank to put it in. Okay. Huang says that my cousin shut down and he has Kent salt mix. Yeah, you can use Kent. I've used Kent in the past. Just make sure that you measure it for alkalinity, or like I said, pH. Listen, the thing about pH and alkalinity, when you're making salt water, you need to measure one or the other. If you have a pH probe you can put in your tank and it tells you your tank is 8.1, you can move the probe out of your tank and you can put it in the saltwater barrel and see if it says 8.1. And if it says 7.6, you can put in some soda ash, which is baked baking soda, and you can raise that pH in that barrel up to 8.1, and now it's ready for the water change. If you are not measuring with pH, you can measure with alkalinity. And let's say you measure your tank and it's 9 DKH. So you measure the salt water that you've mixed up and it might be 6.5 DKH. So you use soda ash again to bring up the alkalinity till it's 9. And when they're both 9, you can do your water change. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I did use Kent for many, many years. And then one day years ago, it was a big problem. It was nationwide. None of the salt mix that went out to everybody, and I think it even went international, had alkalinity in it. So people were mixing up salt water and they were just pouring in their tank and their tanks were just going downhill and they couldn't figure out why. And they finally started testing their salt mix and they're like, wow, there's no alkalinity. It was measured like 1 DKH. And of course everyone's mad. They're all mad at Kent. They're furious. And it didn't happen to me because I measured and my pH was low and I was buffering it up to get it up before I poured it in my tank. And I just thought it was low pH because of CO2 in my house because it was winter and I never opened doors or windows. I breathe the same air nonstop all the time. I'm like the guy in the bubble, you know? And so I would just buffer it up and I just kept putting in buffer until the pH was right. And I was like, okay, now it's safe to use. And it was later when I learned what was going on and I started measuring batches of salt with Kent, I saw my alkalinity was measuring 1 DKH. It was literally bad and I had 6 buckets of it. Now that was a long time ago. I doubt your cousin has buckets of Kent salt from that long ago, but still double check when you mix the salt to make sure your alkalinity or your pH is the right level or buffer it up if you need to. You can also measure for calcium and magnesium if you want as well. You can measure for phosphate. Of course, you're going to check temperature and salinity because you need to anyway. But that alkalinity / pH, either of those two will tell you what you need to know to bring it up to match your aquarium. Okay, great question. The Zen Gender says, you said you have a top-off reservoir that you fill up occasionally. How often do you clean it and or let it dry out? Do you ever have problems with growth of anything in there? Such a good question. Thank you so much for asking that. So my story is this. I built a giant top-off container that barely fit under my aquarium years ago. I had a brand new tank on a steel stand, and I measured my distance, and I made my container, and I had to put the container into the metal stand and then down onto the floor and then slide into position. Then I had to take the sump, push it into the stand and put it into position. And then I hooked up the plumbing. And I knew I'd never get that container out again without disconnecting the plumbing and removing the sump. So that thing was there for the life of the tank. And I thought, man, how am I going to ever clean this thing? Well, I never, ever, ever put my hand in there. I have water going in through a float valve that the water trickles in, and then when the float rises, it stops the water from from flooding the room, and then I go turn off the RODI system. And it's sitting next to my sump that has a refugium with a light. And I was thinking, oh boy, I bet that refugium light is going to make algae grow in this top-off container, and that's just going to be so difficult to clean. How am I going to deal with all this? Well, it turns out I learned a lot of things. Number one, light does not, even though you see the light going into that container, it's not transmitting the light to the point where it could grow algae. It is actually bouncing off the wall of your sump and going back into the refugium. So while you visibly see some light going there, it's not putting anything that's going to hurt it. Because my container that I had never ever put my arm into was 7 years old, of being refilled every single week. And after 7 years, it was measuring 1 TDS. It was that pristine in there. And it looked brand new the entire time. It never looked dirty. Occasionally, I would take a sponge and wipe the whole top. And of course, I would wipe down the sides if they got any kind of drips or spatters or anything like that. It always looked brand new. And then around year 7 of my reef, I decided to build a new sump. And when I did that, I said, I'm going to make a new top-off container I can remove in case I need to clean it occasionally. So this time I made the top-off container about 4 inches shorter. I think the first container held 47, 49 gallons of water. The new one holds 43. So it's a little bit smaller, and it has a nice big access door on the top. The first one I made had a sliding door that I just would, like, it had a little thing, you just went, and that was it, it was closed. And I would never open unless I had to replace the pump, for the top-off system. And this new one, I did like I do the ones I sell on my site. We have a round circle. You can remove it. You can put in the pump. You can run the tubing up, and that's it. You don't have to reach in there ever again. And that container also, now I said I installed that after 7 years. My tank is coming up on 10, and it looks brand new as well. They don't get dirty. They don't have any, light doesn't affect it. Sunlight hitting it in the morning right now with summer, it's just blasting in. Nothing's growing in it because it's pure water. There's nothing in there for life to grow from because it's just pure water. And so I never have to take it out or clean it or spray it or sanitize it or anything like that. I just keep my hands out of it at all costs. It's always covered at all times. And that has worked really, really well for me. So hopefully you can do something similar. But if you can't, then yes, once or twice a year, it's smart to take the container out, rub it down with vinegar and water, or, like you can use sponges, you can use an old t-shirt, and you can use a vinegar and water solution to wipe down all the walls, rinse it out really well. And then if you want to let it dry out for a little while, you can. But once it's completely cleaned out, it's ready to refill. And you just fill it up with water and put it back under your tank. But having a lid on top is key, and sealing it up as much as possible. Now mine is not 100% sealed, because if it was, the tubing that's pushing water out would end up creating a vacuum, and the water wouldn't be able to exit. So there is a little tiny gap around the 1/4 inch tubing that's coming up. The hole might be a 1/2 inch, or maybe it's 3/8 of an inch, and then the tubing coming out is 1/4 inch. And so there's just a little bit of slack there for a little bit of air to equalize. And usually I can't really see anything in the upper part because of condensation, because of the temperature of the room itself versus the temperature of the water in the container. But there's no heater in it. There's no circulation pump in there. I don't put anything in there. I don't put prime in there. I don't put kalkwasser in there. It's literally RODI water and a pump, and then that ruler thing I told you about. So if that ruler thing were ever degrade and do something and dissolve into the water, I might have to deal with cleaning it. But at least now I could remove the container for cleaning if I needed to. Greg D says, for a 100-gallon tank, 4 foot by 2 foot, is it okay to have a convict, a scopus, a tomini tang, a rabbitfish, a wrasse, and a couple of maroon clowns? Yeah. If all those tanks are small, but eventually you're going to need a bigger tank. A 4-foot tank is kind of short for those type of tanks. The tomini is probably the smallest one of those, as a mature fish. But the convict and the scopus and even a yellow tang, they're going to get pretty big. They're going to want a 6-foot tank or better. Now, I had a little itty-bitty tiny hippo tang in my 60-gallon cube for many years, and it grew from something about an inch to maybe something that was about 3.5 inches long, but it was in there for like 5 or 6 years, and eventually I did move it out of there. But if you're able to buy tiny tangs, little tiny ones, yes, you can put those in your 100-gallon and have a great time. But in a few years, they're going to need a bigger, longer tank. Maud Zeister says, Zister, did I say it right? Said, I have a 10-gallon nano with just 2 ORA black snowflake clowns that's been running for 5 years. I watched them grow from little babies. I love that. Triggerfish says, look for the cowrie at night. That's the only time that his is active. I will. I've been watching it. I've been watching around the clock. I keep looking. I just never see it. Even this morning I was looking too before the lights ever came on. I was like, I can't believe this thing isn't on the glass somewhere. It's so weird. Lord Thornton says, how do you handle algae growing nuts in your refugium? All that's growing in my refugium is feather caulerpa and then sometimes some cyano. Other than that, I don't have other algae that are causing problems in there. And I do clean the glass, the acrylic. I scrape it with a credit card to keep a nice view. And Fluxorex is fluconazole, yes. It's a jar of powder with a spoon, so you don't have to sit there and open little capsules. I sell 3 different sizes of Fluxorex on Me Loves Reef, for the 100-gallon tank, the 200-gallon tank, and the 350-gallon tank. So it's just a matter of how much of this product you want to buy when you're buying a package of it. Alien says, I got a Goniopora 2 days ago and it has not opened. At what point should I start to worry? My tank is a year old and I got Alveoporas doing well and growing, etc. I'd look at that coral late at night. I would look at, it could be that it's used to a different feeding schedule. It could be that it's getting used to flow. It could be of a fish in there that's picking and nipping at it, so it's scared to open up. These are just some of the thoughts that come to mind, but you've only had a couple of days. I would say if it doesn't open for a week straight, 10 days, that's when you should start getting worried. Hopefully in another day or two, it should start to open up. But I would put it down low in the tank in an area of low flow. And then I don't know what kind of foods you have to feed your corals, but there's that stuff from Red Sea, the, what's it called? AB+, the green liquid. You might try that and see if that can entice to open it up. If you have any kind of like PE mysis and you could soak it in water and then just pour the juice into the tank, you could see if that might get the coral to open up as well. These are some techniques that may help. Sky and Sea says, if you want a high flow tank, how coarse can the sand be to realistically prevent it from blowing around? Can you use aragonite gravel grains the size of, say, peas or just straight crushed coral? I don't like crushed coral in a reef tank. It might stay positioned for you, but boy, does it trap detritus. You will not believe the brown funk you will continually be trying to pull out of that crushed coral. It's a nightmare. My 400-gallon, I feel like it has high flow. I use a type of sand from Tropic Eden called Reef Flakes, and the sand grains are 3 millimeters in size. That is way smaller than peas, and it doesn't blow around like crazy. I have one spot in the front of my tank that tends to have a low spot, and I've even given up on trying to fill it up with sand. Occasionally I reach in there when I'm working, I kind of shove the sand back, but usually that part migrates away again. I just can't seem to solve it, but everywhere else in the tank, the sand stays where it belongs. So you may have a spot where it does look a little bit uneven, but then again, if your sand looked completely even and flat, would it look natural? Or if you're trying to mimic nature in the ocean, you're going to have ebbs and you're going to have different highs and lows in the tank, and it'll look natural. Sky and Sea says, can you have a reef tank with just closed loops and no visible power heads for the sake of a clean look? Yes, you totally can. Thank you for an easy question. I love that. Yeah, Alien says that he's feeding Fido and also every night the AB+. Good. I would try those things. Make sure your filtration is off for at least 30 to 45 minutes. And then if you have it plugged into anything like a Hydros controller or an Apex controller or some kind of a mechanical timer, make sure it turns your filtration back on, because that's one of those things that you don't want to have to remember to go plug it back in. You can set a timer on your wristwatch or on your phone to, after 45 minutes to chirp and remind you to go turn something back on, but then you have to go remember to turn it on or plug it in. But if you have something that you can hit a button and it stops it, but then it resumes automatically, so much nicer. Richard Graff says, do you have any idea if translucent polyethylene is safe for water storage, particularly saturated kalkwasser? I do not know. I do know you want to use HDPE, that is high density polyethylene, but I don't know about translucent, so I don't have an answer for you. But I know people have made kalkwasser in brute trash cans where you can't even see through it at all and used it for years and years. Helen says, I recently upgraded my 66 gallon and added a wrasse and moved my long-nosed hawkfish from my nano. A few weeks later, I found my cleaner shrimp in half. Is one of these the above the culprit? Well, yeah, probably. It is possible for a fish to do that, and the long-nosed hawkfish could potentially hurt a shrimp, an ornamental shrimp. That does happen from time to time. I had a long-nosed hawkfish in my 29 gallon with a coral banded shrimp and a cleaner shrimp, and I did not realize that the coral banded shrimp and the cleaner shrimp didn't get along. They're two totally different looking shrimp, and it took me a while to notice they were always at opposite sides of the tank, and when one went here, the other went here, and they were always doing this dance around the rockwork. And then the day before I was moving everything out of the 29 into the new 280 gallon reef, literally the next day I was doing this, right? That night, the coral banded shrimp caught the shrimp and tore it in half. I was like, you are about to have so much running room. I cannot believe this happened. So the coral banded shrimp was my culprit, but in your case, it could have been the long-nosed hawkfish. My long-nosed hawkfish never bothered it, but you know what it did bother? It was weird. The long-nosed hawkfish would chase a copper band. Now, a copper band's a butterfly fish. They are very active swimmers. And a hawkfish doesn't have a swim bladder. It perches and it jets, and then it perches and it jets. it doesn't have it can't just swim. And it was constantly chasing the butterfly. It was gonna kill it. And I was like, how are you without a swim bladder this proactively chasing a butterfly fish? And I had to remove the hawkfish. It was too much of a problem for me. Oh, a Melanurus wrasse could eat a ornamental shrimp for sure. Yes. Yeah, that would make more sense. Yep. The Melanurus is really pretty, but boy, it likes peppermints, it likes blood shrimp, it likes cleaner shrimp, it likes shrimp. You can feed it krill, by the way, now that you know, but that's unfortunate you lost your cleaner shrimp because those are so pretty. Alien says, should I turn off the skimmer when dosing Fido? Absolutely. Any kind of filtration should be turned off. Matter of fact, if you were running UV, I would turn that off too during the feeding cycle of phytoplankton and AB+. Lord Thornton says, do you build custom ATOs, top-off containers? Yeah, yes I do. I've been building them for many years. I've got a couple on the table right now, and I do build them custom to fit the exact spot where they need to go. So you can just email me at sales@milasreef.com. I'll get you a quote, and you can tell me what you need. Thomas says, should I retest my nitrate? I added Fritz Zyme 460 yesterday. Nope. You test your nitrate once a week or whatever it is you do. Fritz Zyme is a slow-going process. You're going to put that in every week or every 2 weeks, and then maybe in 3 months or so, you'll notice the change. It's not a fast working product. It's putting in a type of bacteria that eats waste, and it will gradually, sneakily remove the nitrate from the system. And then one day you're like, hey, it's working. But it's not. There's no instant gratification with Fritzyme 460. The Zen Ginger says, is there a standard ratio for an appropriate size sump, like 40%, 60% of the tank, etc.? I'm going to set up a 125 and I'm trying to determine what size sump I realistically need with some refugium space. Okay, so the more you can get in, like Mod Sizer says, the more sump you can get into, the better. Ideally, if you could put a 125 gallon tank under a 125 gallon tank, it can hold every drop of water, which would be, worst case scenario, but that's not realistic. For a 125 gallon tank, I would see a sump that's under there that's probably 48 inches by 16 by 16, maybe 48 inches by 20 by 16, and the refugium actually needs the percentage more than the sump. Ideally, you want the refugium to be 10% of your tank. So if you have a 125 gallon tank, you want to have a 12.5 gallon refugium to be beneficial to the tank. Just having a cute little refugium is not necessarily a benefit because the footprint's so small. So I've always recommended at least 10% of your display tank, but that's a lot of space in a sump. And you'll feel it. You'll say, wow, I have very little room for other things now. That's true. But it is ideal. But if you can't quite manage it, if you can only get a 10-gallon refugium in there, so be it. That's okay too. Now, the rest of the sump is going to have to hold your protein skimmer. It may have to hold a fleece roller, which takes up a lot of space. If you're not doing fleece rollers, you might be doing filter socks, and those again take up space. And then you have a return pump, you have heaters, and then if you're running any kind of reactors that you want to put inside the sump as well, those things are all going to need their footprint. You need room for all those things in the sump somewhere. And then of course you're going to want some kind of top-off system with a sensor in the return zone of the sump to replace water that evaporates. But yeah, that would be the size I would think you'd stick under there. But also you need to make sure that your protein skimmer will fit that sump. So when you're shopping around for, now I build custom sumps. If you want to do that and you want me to build you the dream sump, I can do it. If you're buying something off the shelf, just find out what size the skimmer zones are before you buy the protein skimmer, because if you get the sump and that skimmer you bought doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And there's nothing you can do to stretch or shrink it. You will have to get a different sump or you'll have to get a different skimmer. So you kind of need to go in order of sump first and then gear next. All right. You know what? I think we should wrap up. We've been going for about 2 hours, despite my 15-minute secret silent movie interlude. So let's just do this. It is Water Test Saturday. Please do test your tanks. It's so important that you verify all the parameters of your tank, because if you do that, your livestock will live and thrive and be beautiful and healthy and happy and gorgeous, and you'll be able to brag about your tank. And I know some of you are still just saying, yeah, whatever, I test when I feel like it, or I haven't bought kits or whatever. Well, just buy the kits. Just do it. This is actually part of reef keeping. Knowing what your water quality is really important. And the more you know, the better you can take care of your animals, because water tests save lives. That's what Caitlin said. And lastly, in case you are newer to this channel, you have no idea who Caitlin is. Caitlin was the love of my life, and she died 2.5 years ago. And so I set up a tank in her honor. I mention her from time to time because she's still part of me, and I miss her every single day. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you again next Saturday. Bye.